everybody, and welcome to another exciting episode of Team Lead Talks. On today's episode, we welcome Michelle Berman-Mikel of Berman Media PD, creator of Beyond the Method.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Andrew. I'm stoked to be here. It's gonna be
Yeah,
fun.
we're stoked to have you and learn a lot about what you're doing. So let's just jump right into this, Michelle. Can you start by giving our listeners just a little bit about your background, and then we'll kind of jump into a little bit more detail here?
Yeah, I love starting off this way. I'm a big people person. I'm really relationship driven, so it's one of those things like nobody really cares about what we truly do until they feel like they like us, right? So,
Right. Yeah.
um, big some logistical things about me. I am a mom. I have a 2.5-year-old. His name is Knox. He was named after Fort Knox. For those of you guys inquiring or thinking that, my husband is prior military, and we now live in a military town, so we are really adamant about kind of embracing that, I guess, when we decided to name our son. But I've been doing this for a long time. I've been in the mortgage real estate space for about 10 years. And I got into the Instagram space back in 2014, well before it is what it now is, or was what it now is. And really at the time, Instagram was a platform that people were using to influencer or to create influencer marketing, right? So people were paying for time slots. They were buying hour spots, 2 hour spots, 24-hour spots, that type of thing, trying to sell product.
Right.
And back in the day, I was buying and selling Instagram accounts and flipping them just like you would buy and sell real estate and flip them for profit. And in the meantime, in between selling them, I was selling ad space to some of these bigger audiences or bigger product type companies. But what happened by default, I guess, or maybe on accident, was I started getting really, really good at understanding what actually worked, what ultimately created opportunity for eyeballs to not just see something, but then to want to click on something and purchase something. And then I really face planted into the world of kind of what people like now call power likes, or sort of the fake views, fake video views, fake followers, fake likes, all that stuff. I started studying it. So I would literally study accounts and actually understand whether that was happening or not, because if I was good at calling it out, it ultimately made my clients happier, right? Because I would be picking different accounts for my clients' content to go on that was more successful in that hour or 2 hours or 24 hours that we were buying that time for.
Sure.
So the idea was obviously we wanted to drive website clicks. We wanted to drive an audience to a platform. But if I was paying for my client to be on an account for an hour and that hour did absolutely nothing, typically we could associate it back to something. And I started picking up on that.
Okay.
So fast forward 3-4 years, I decided, this is really fun doing this for everybody else, but I'm going to start doing it for myself. And so I ended up building what is now known as Beyond the Method. We officially launched in 2019, and then the mortgage and real estate space became my lane, if you will, on accident, really. Everybody pretty much says that. Nobody says that they wake up and they're like, I wanted to be a real estate agent today, right? Or I got into mortgage today because I just couldn't wait to do loans, right? It sort of happens on accident, and that is true for me, just like all of the rest of us. But it became very apparent to me that mortgage and real estate professionals were very high driven individuals, right? We're entrepreneurs at heart. Typically, we don't like working for another organization. We like being able to build our own time and build our own day to day. And so I started realizing that I was really in love with this population of people. We had very similar interests, very similar mindsets. And so in 2019, I exclusively niched down to the real estate and mortgage space. And we just haven't even looked back since. So it's been a wild ride, but a good one.
That sounds awesome. I love it. You started kind of doing it, did it for yourself, and then kind of how I have other real estate initiatives or companies that we do as well. But it always starts for me personally, and it sounds like kind of for you and a lot of people. You do it for yourself, and then other people start to take notice and like, can you do that for me? And you're like, hey, I might have something here. So that's really awesome. I love hearing those kind of like where I started, what I went through stories, and where I am today. So let's start to zero in on this Beyond the Method, though. So this is a Team Lead Talks is predominantly real estate teams, agents, but you do mortgage and real estate agents, right? Can you kind of walk us through your process for what you can offer these people in this industry, and like what that looks like?
Yeah, thank you for that question. The number one thing I will tell you guys listening, especially team leaders, right, is I feel like we have an obligation to lead by example, and I think that that's kind of the premise of this, right? Is if you're not doing it, how can you expect all the rest of the people that are working for you to also want to do it?
Exactly.
And that's a big piece. So when I built Beyond the Method, the concept was if I'm not doing it, then I can't teach somebody else to do it. So when I built it, that was the process behind it. It was literally just a copy paste of what I was doing for myself every single day. But as far as what do we specifically cover and what do I teach, the true answer comes down to prospecting. So the number one thing with prospecting, right, and Andrew, I'm sure you have experienced cold calling a time or two in your life.
Yep.
It sucks. Like there's no way around. And like I know very few people that enjoy that, right? Nobody likes getting hung up on. Go ahead. What you were look like you were
It's
about to say something.
Yeah, I was saying cold calling. So I've done it myself. I've overseen a team of 10, 15 cold callers at some point in my life and my career. I'll say it is fun. It can be fun for a very short amount of time. Power to the people who do that longer than a month, 2 months, 3 months, or years. But yeah, it's there. I think there are easier, more economical ways, which we're getting into right now. But
Yeah.
cold calling is a tough business.
Well, but it is a good thing in the sense of it teaches you how to overcome objections, which is really important.
Right.
But I think the biggest thing that I saw a hole in the game, if you will, is that when we get on a call, the very first thing or the very first job that we have is to build a relationship with someone, right? Our goal is to get them to stay on the phone with us long enough to the point where we are now getting to talk about what it is that we actually do. But
Yeah.
that's the hard part, and that's the piece of it where when you have a list of names that you're trying to call, you don't know anything about them, right? You don't have any bullet points of who they are. You don't know where they enjoy hanging out in their free time. You don't know if they have kids, if they have a dog, if they like coffee or tea. Like you don't have any of this information. So you're truly quite literally winging it, right?
Right.
When you're talking to them. And I saw this and the visionary that I am, I guess I said, there has to be a better way to create rapport with someone before we get on the phone with them. And Instagram became the platform for me that I felt like I could be vulnerable and I could be authentic, and that would translate really well into starting conversations with people. And then I realized if I have more conversations with people, more people will get to know me. And in getting to know me, they'll realize that they like me and that they ultimately want to work with me if they
Sure.
trust that side of it. So long story short, built Beyond the Method to be a prospecting process. So to teach real estate agents how to use Instagram as a leveraging platform to create opportunity, not just to be talking to the right people, but to be talking about the things that they actually enjoy so that the conversations they're having end up being conversations that are one, qualified to be on the phone with them by the time that happens. And two, you alleviate the shopping you around situation because by the time someone ends up on the phone with you, if you've done this right, they're all in. Like they like you, they want to talk to you, they feel connected to you. And then ultimately, after that happens, it's your job as the agent to make sure that you're following up, right? Follow up is key. We all know
Sure.
that. No secret to that myself. But follow up typically is where people will fall off, right? So they'll gather and they'll have a good conversation with someone. They'll end up doing a phone call with them or a Zoom meeting or whatever it might be, or maybe they go meet them in real life. And then now what? So that's where the second half of what I teach really has come in because the content side of what we do is designed to help us stay top of mind. And then the prospecting aspect or the day to day, what are we supposed to be doing on the Instagram platform as far as who are we talking to and what are we saying, all of that. Make sure that if someone has taken the time to do that with us, that they don't just fall by the wayside,
Right.
and we actually stay in front of them. So there's a long answer to that we can get into if we have time, but basically there's a day-to-day tracker that you'll follow to be able to make sure you don't let anybody slip through the cracks.
That's awesome. So, just in case anyone is wondering, is this 100% exclusive to Instagram?
Technically, no. Beyond the Method was developed as a platform to teach Instagram specifically, but as my career has evolved, it's become very apparent that not only am I doing it on multiple platforms, but it can be done where you can pull from other platforms to help you leverage through the Instagram space. So, like you and I connected on Facebook, Andrew, right? But the act of how I reached out to you was the exact same way that I would teach someone to do it, whether it was on Instagram or LinkedIn or whatever other platform it might have been. So it does bleed out into other platforms. And
Okay.
some people might be doing it on other platforms exclusively while trying to build what they're doing on Instagram
Okay.
secondarily to that.
Yeah, I would love to dive in a little bit deeper if it's cool
Yeah.
around like the concepts here.
Yeah.
But ultimately, Michelle, it's the concept of know, like, and trust, and not
Mm-hmm.
having to start that conversation in a 100% cold manner of like,
Yep.
this is who I am if they don't hang up on you, right? But the goal here is so they see you, they like you, they trust you through beyond the method. Is this to ultimately get an appointment or a phone call first or a combination of whatever?
Really a combination of both. It's also not just to go D to C, right? Which what that means is direct to client or direct to consumer. It also is the opportunity to gather opportunities with like influencer type or small business type, right? Or being able to get opportunities where maybe it's the local coffee shop and they ask you to come in and be somebody that they feature for the month, like the real estate feature of the month or whatever it might be, right? We have had clients that have crushed this in all different kinds of categories. I mean, I've taught real estate agents how to get on podcasts, right? Like literally, if that's part of their goal and part of your marketing is to get on as many podcasts as possible, well, easy. Like I can help you do that because it's how you use leverage. So by
Yeah.
definition, Beyond the Method teaches you how to leverage your pre-existing connections and then also dig into the connections you already have or the data that you already have access to. So let's say we have that cold calling list of 100 names that we have in front of us. Can we go find them on Instagram? Can we create a connection with them on Facebook, Instagram, whatever the platform is? Start a warm up of our relationship with them and then call them so that if we have 100 names, how do we make the most out of the 100 names? In my opinion, it's what if we had all 100 names and we had 3 to 5 bullet points next to every single one of those about who they are, how many kids they have, are they married, what do they enjoy doing out, like all these things, right? And
Mhm.
that gives us the ability to, when we do get on the phone, completely change the conversation or the tone of the conversation.
Sure.
So the true focal point is, can we use leverage and can we do that in a way where we're not necessarily going to try and find more, but instead we're trying to dig our teeth into the or the data that we already have access to.
It's almost like a quality over quantity kind of thing,
Absolutely.
doing more with less, having a better conversion of,
Yes.
I can call 1,000 people, or you might be able to implement your Beyond the Method to 100 and
Yep.
do better than me, right?
Yep, exactly. I mean, I just this morning was on a call with a client who sent 20 DMs over the last 5 days, right? So we've been tracking it, and very specifically, we have a very targeted goal in mind for him of who he wants to be talking to. 20 DMs per day for those 5 days. His reply rate was 46%, which is great,
Yeah.
right? So if we're sending 100 messages and we're getting 46% of them to respond, like I'm stoked by that number. And then we had a total of 18% of them say yes to a meeting. So of the 46%, 18% of that number said yes to getting on a call with him, which I think translated into, I want to say 6, if I remember the exact number. So
Cool.
out of the 100, or yeah, out of the 100 DMs he sent, he got 46 replies. Of the 46 replies, he got 6 appointments. Like I would take those stats all day
Yeah, it's
if
not
I
bad.
were an agent trying to do this myself, right? Like that's the point. But how do we do that is the key, right? Knowing who to be talking to, knowing how, not just who to be talking to, but what to say so that we actually get a response. And there's a lot of psychology that's involved in that aspect, which I'm sure we'll get to speak into or talk about. But knowing who to talk to is half the battle. But most importantly, we have to make sure that when we start a conversation with someone, that it's done in a way where someone really feels like we're being genuine and authentic in that, and that we're not just coming at it from a business aspect. Because right, we're talking to team leaders here. How many of you guys have been prospected by loan officers like all day every day,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And how many of those messages are good? Like
Yeah.
very few of them. They come across very poorly. And it's like the desperation is bad. Like you can feel it in the message.
Hmm.
So whether you're on the real estate side or the mortgage side, right, you're listening and you're thinking, well, how do I alleviate that? And that's where consuming someone's content comes into play, making sure that we're acknowledging them every human on this planet wants to feel seen and wants to feel heard. So how do we speak into that first, and then use subliminal marketing to tie what we do for a living into that message, and then ultimately end it in the form of a question, so that you on the receiving end feel like you want to respond. You sort of feel obligated to, in a weird way, when you receive a message like that, which means that my message worked, right? If I'm sending a message to you and you feel kind of obligated to respond, it means that I did my job and how I initiated that contact. And then if somebody responds, not everybody's going to respond in another question, right? Not everybody's going to be like open to question, question, question. Let's keep chatting. So you, as the person who are trying to prospect them, have to, a mutual friend of ours, Grant Wise, he tells me all the time, he says, you have to live in the land of curiosity. And that's true in how we prospect, especially in the social space, right? If someone responds back to us, but it's in a statement or it's just like a couple words, then are we just going to let the conversation die? Or are we going to do what we need to do to try to keep the conversation going? So that's where that living in the space of curiosity or land of curiosity really comes into play.
Okay, cool. So the first step is kind of like identifying your list, and not a massive list, but a controlled list. And then you mentioned like going into a conversation, there's either super cold, you know nothing about each other, or you know, like bullet points. How do you, and I mean this in like the nicest way, but without coming off as like stalkerish, can you
Yeah.
give us like, let's talk about this. Like,
Yeah.
you're starting conversations with these people. You are like, how are you approaching this start without being like, hey, Michelle, I saw this. And you're like, who the heck is this? And why do they know that about me? Can you dive a little bit deeper and like, okay, I know this stuff about Andrew, but how are you tactically kind of using
Yeah.
it?
Tactically is my jam. So let's get tactical.
Let's dive
So
deep.
if you're a real estate agent, right, and you're trying to prospect on Instagram, and let's say one of the days of your week you're focused on small businesses in your area, right? So you're focused on prospecting um, small businesses in your top 5 cities that you sell in. Like, so whether that's a main city or a sub city. And when I say sub city, I mean like I live in Clarksville, Tennessee, but I live in the Sango area of Clarksville, which technically doesn't have its own zip code, right? But if you're anywhere in Clarksville and you say, "Oh, I live in Sango," everybody knows what that means. So when I say sub city, that's what I mean. But let's say you're prospecting in your top 5 sub cities or cities that you're trying to actively sell real estate in. Your goal will be to go to this person's account and consume their content first. So look at the content that's on their grid, leave a comment on their first piece of content if there is something that's somewhat recent. But where the open the door conversations come into play, where we start asking questions, is in stories. So if that person has a story up, here's how that would look, right? Let's say I love using this example because it's everybody's done it, right? But Girl Scout cookies. Let's talk about Girl Scout cookies for a second,
All
okay?
right, let's go.
So let's say I am the general consumer that you, Andrew, the real estate agent, are trying to message to get a conversation going, so you can start to talk to me about maybe buying or selling. You just don't know yet.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to look at my stories, and let's say that in my stories I posted this picture of me buying a whole bunch of Girl Scout cookies from the cute girls outside of Walmart, right? We've all done it. Now, let's say the way that your message would sound would be 3 parts, and all 3 of these parts is one message, just for clarity. So I'm going to break down the 3 parts for you guys, but just for understanding, that is one message. So it's not 3 separate messages, it's one. But the 3 parts is acknowledgement, subliminal business play, and then ending in the form of a question. So how you, Andrew, would message me would sound something like, oh my gosh, I fell victim to this last weekend too. I actually bought $100 worth and I can't believe I spent that much money on them. But I have a bunch of closings next week, so I'm actually going to go ahead and just give some of them to my clients as presents, because who doesn't love Girl Scout cookies? What is your favorite flavor? What is your favorite one that you always look forward to every year? So in that message, how do you feel if you are the one receiving that?
Yeah, I kind of understand. You're like resonating with them, and they're kind of interested that they like. I've never, number one, Michelle, I've never received a message like that. I'd probably be a little intrigued. Number two, I picked up on that subliminal messaging part. Like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
closing, but I'm like, what? And then I'd probably answer you.
Right? So that means I did my job
Right.
if I'm trying to prospect you, in the sense of I got a conversation going and I made the conversation about you, not about me. Right? which is ultimately the point. So when you're cold calling someone, right, you're not going to get on the phone with someone and just immediately go into talking about
Right.
yourself.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
that doesn't make any sense. So it's the same concept. We're just translating it to a digital space. And in this case, when we're doing it on Instagram, and I've been teaching this now across the country for, I would say, about 5 years. And the thing I have seen the most is like these light bulb moments go on in people's heads where they're like, oh my gosh, it's so simple. Like, I get it. And they don't realize that that's what you do in real life anyway, right? Like, you don't walk into a networking thing, or let's say you're on the board of whatever and you're going in for an event. You don't immediately just start talking about yourself. And
Right.
if you did, you're probably not going to get invited back to the
Some
next one.
people
But
might, but yeah.
maybe. But
Yeah.
the reality is like, when you're trying to forge an opportunity or build a relationship with someone, you typically ask them about them.
Right.
And that's what we have to do on Instagram. And the only difference is now we get to do it at a very scalable level. So I always use the example of like, would you rather send 100 DMs or would you rather do 100 cold calls? And why? Right? Well, one, more people are going to respond. Two, you have the less of the issue with, or not more people will respond. That's eventually happens. But what doing 100 DMs as opposed to doing 100 calls will do is you're going to feel less intrusive, right? You're going to be more likely to actually complete the task because it's also faster, right?
Right.
We're way more likely to be able to get through sending 100 messages than we are 100 calls in a day. Unless we have a dialer, but that's a different conversation.
Mhm.
So the reality is that in doing so, we can also be personal, right? We can also take that extra second to consume someone's story, which takes all of 10 seconds. Like, it's not this process where you're sitting there just like staring at someone's Instagram account for minutes before you send a message, right? It's a very intuitive, sort of fast process. And what happens is that same 100 that you're trying to cold call versus that 100 that you DM, again, you tie that into what is our response rate. And then when someone responds, how well are we doing, or how good are we doing at getting the conversation to continue? So your at bats are stronger. And ultimately, what's going to happen is the people that you do actually end up on the phone with are the people that are qualified to be there with you.
Right. And just to be clear, it's scalable from a digital point of view, right? Because you're doing it
Yeah,
on Instagram, typing it out,
exactly.
versus like dialing and it's ringing and it takes forever and all that.
Well,
Well,
can you have multiple conversations at the same time on the phone?
right. Yeah, the answer is no. But in Instagram, it's a manual process, right? There's no like automation around this because you're consuming the story, the Girl Scout story, thinking, right? Typing it out. So that's
Mhm.
something that a person is actually sitting there, like on their phone, on their desktop, or whatever, wherever they're doing it. What do you mentioned like 100? Is that
Mhm.
like typically beyond the method? Are you teaching people to do that like 100 people a day, or can you talk about
Mm-mm.
like the scalability and the outreach top
Yeah.
of
So really, that's a really good question and a really good angle of coming at it. So the way that I teach it is it's a 5 day tracker. So you have 5 different days of the week. Each of those 5 days have a very specific category that we're focused on. So for example, Mondays is most likely, depending on who you are, but in most cases. And I also like want to do an asterisk real quick and just say, like, if you're a team leader and you're trying to recruit, this is going to sound a little bit different than if you're an individual agent. And if you're a team leader and you're not trying to recruit, you're just trying to be a good steward or a good leader, that also has different responsibilities than someone who's actively trying to build one-to-one business, right?
right?
So, which if we can transition, but like for me as a leader, right, my ultimate CTA of like what I'm trying to get out of prospecting is different than maybe a single agent on the team, for
Yeah,
clarity.
I think if it's okay with you, like for the purpose of this discussion, it probably would help, especially given like now today's landscape of like inventory is low, everyone's like, where are the leads, where are the leads? If we just go down that track, like if you're an agent, team leader, or just on a team in
Okay.
general, like let's
Yeah.
have the bottom of this funnel be, I reach out to Michelle using these tactics to ultimately land a conversation on the phone or an appointment in person.
Yep, exactly. Great. Okay, so the way that this builds out is it's 5 days of the week, and each of the 5 days again have its own specific category. So Mondays, for example, we'll use Monday as an example because it's typically for most people it's the easiest. And what Mondays is leverage day, or that's kind of what I've been calling it. But leverage specifically means that if I am the real estate agent doing this, I'm going to go to the account of someone that I've recently helped buy or sell. Right. So I'm going to go to their Instagram account, and then I'm going to click the little person with a plus sign button that's in their profile. And what's going to happen is I'm going to get this big giant drop down of a whole bunch of other accounts that are similar to that account, that Instagram is basically saying, hey, you know Andrew, and you might, because you know Andrew, you might know all of these other people. So what I get to do now is I get to go down the wormhole of consuming all of these other accounts. And if I click on their profile and they have a good piece of content for me to engage with, I will. If they have a story up, I'll engage with the story in the method I just taught a few minutes ago. And in the response, so once that person who I'm now messaging responds, my third or follow-up message back to their reply, I now get to tie in my relationship with you into that message.
Gotcha.
So I am leveraging my relationship with you, Andrew, in my new relationship with Taylor or
whoever is following under me.
Correct.
Real quick, because this might be on people's minds. Are you doing this from a personal account, from a business branded account? Like, can you explain that?
Business. So if you are a real estate agent trying to generate business off of any social platform, you have to be a business account or a creator account. And I actually just did a whole Facebook Live on this in my Facebook group, which I'm happy to give you, Andrew, if you want to put in the show notes, because like you have to go listen to this. Because first of all, I just am very passionate about it, but I ended up on like a 25-minute rant about this exact question because I actually had a client who hired a branding company to do all of their branding, right? Make all of their colors, build all their templates, like all the logo, the whole thing. And I had given my client a couple of accounts to go look at as examples, just to make sure she had something in her head when she went to the branding company. And the branding company looked at all the accounts and told my client, these are awful. And my client told me this. She was like, Michelle, I was really taken aback by this. Like, I couldn't believe it. And I was like, well, did she tell you why she felt like they were awful? And she's like, yeah, because there's all this personal content on these accounts, and it shouldn't be that. Like, there should be no pictures of you cooking or your dog or the bunny that your daughter brought home from college. And I thought to myself, I was like, okay, client, how do you feel about that? Like, when you heard that from her, how do you feel? And she's like, oh, I completely disagree.
Yeah.
And so we ended up having a 45-minute conversation about this. And the tie-in to that, right, is the personal content becomes the foundation of how we prospect. So if we don't have personal content and I go to your account and it's just business, 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 business all the time, I am not going to interact with you.
Right.
Like, I'm just not, right? Because to your point, you said it in the beginning, you said the like, know, and trust triangle. Well, how do we build the like and the know if there's nothing for me to get to know or decide if I like?
Right.
And then the business content becomes the trust factor that we're looking for, the credibility factor. So to go back to the very beginning of this, right? Like using leverage, which I think, was that what your initial question? I feel like I went on a tangent. What was your initial question as it relates to that?
What was my initial question? I think
I'm like, I don't.
Number one, it was I'm trying to remember. Business or personal account.
Oh, yes.
Is where this started, I believe.
Yes. So should they be a business account or be a personal account? You have to be a business account. And the main reason for that is analytics, right? The power of the professional dashboard, being able to see where our audience is coming from is a huge one. Being able to also have a contact button in your bio. I cannot tell you how many real estate agents I have literally seen start following my Instagram, and I click on their profile and they do not have a contact button. And on top of that, they don't have a phone number anywhere. Right? Like, I have to scroll all of your content and I have to zoom in on the sign in somebody's front yard to like get your cell phone number. We have a problem. Yeah. And I cannot tell you how many times I've had to do that just even recently. Right. So, and when I say in your bio, I don't mean in the body of your bio, like not in the 160 characters. I mean the actual button that says contact, and then I can click the number and it'll immediately be calling you. So you need to be a business or a creator account. Creator account typically has better audio, which everybody knows. So it just really depends on that. But I'm a creator account. I have clients that are business accounts. I have clients that are creator accounts. Ultimately, you choose. They really are one and the same. But if you are a business account, you're doing this in that manner, and that suggested accounts button then becomes a lot easier and clearer for you to be able to use. And when you start a conversation with that direct to consumer or direct to client, they have a button that they can now click if they choose to, very easily. And ideally, your content speaking to the personal conversations you're having, because that's another problem, right? Like if I'm talking to you about my kid in our DMs and we're going back and forth about our boys, and you click on my profile and you don't see a single picture of my boy anywhere,
Right.
now there's a problem, and sort of that bridge is broken.
Yeah, you're like, does she actually have kids or not? I really
Exactly.
don't know. So just to kind of recap here, not if you're using Instagram to prospect, right, and get in front of prospective clients, business or creator account. Number
Mm-hmm.
one, first and foremost. Number two, have a. This sounds really basic and like foundation level, but have your information for them to contact you readily available and accessible.
Yep.
So like if anyone's listening, like start with maybe those two things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then go from there. But then let's go back into this scenario, right? So you go to me, you hit the plus sign, it says you might know these people, you're having conversations. You're just you have your initial setup of you're saying what they're doing in their story, Girl Scout cookies, a
Acknowledgement.
little
Yep.
subliminal thing, and then a question. And then at that point, does the strategy from Beyond the Method continue of like what to say next and say A, B, like can we start let's just kind of
Yeah,
finish
it's
it out through the end result of getting them on the phone or
yep.
in a person appointment.
Yeah, so there's no A, B, or C situation as far as like a specific sentence I could tell you to go say, right?
Right.
And the main reason for that is we are subject to what someone's sharing, right, or what someone's posting. But let's say, for example, you're responding to me, the Girl Scout cookie post. I respond back to you, then you respond back to me and say, "Hey, I know Logan, and I actually have worked with Logan a lot, and I noticed that you and Logan are connected. How did you and Logan, like, how do you and Logan know each other?" And then depending on that response, that cues up what is next. Now, the most important piece to how do we transition from personal to business is really what everyone's question ends up being, because
Right.
they're like, okay, well, we're having a good conversation about someone's dog or about our kids, but how do we translate that into selling real estate? And what it ultimately comes down to is knowing when to ask. So the average real estate transaction takes anywhere from 7 to 10 touch points to convert, right? And or 7 to 10 follow-ups in order to get someone to an appointment. So in theory, my proposal to you and the way that I teach this is have a good conversation with someone, go back and forth several times. As long as you're using the subliminal business play consistently, eventually they will pick up on it and they will
Right.
maybe ask the question back. And you notice in the example, and if you're listening to this, you guys can go rewind and listen to how Andrew and I did that. But the subliminal business play was I actually have a bunch of closings next week that I am going to go ahead and give some of these to as closing gifts. So we've now dropped this big giant trail of breadcrumbs if we've done this correctly over the course of those 4 to 6 touch points or 5 to 7, however many it takes. And then you got to use your intuition, which I can't really teach intuition. You either have it or you don't, right? But in the reality is that if we're in sales, we all kind of understand this person's giving us the signs of, yeah, we can go for the ask. And if we've gotten someone to respond to us 5 to 7 times, if we then say what we would normally say over the phone in a script to someone via DM, like, hey, Andrew, I've really enjoyed our conversation. It's been really cool getting to know you. It sounds like we have a lot of commonalities. And I actually am going to go to that coffee shop that we've been talking about next Wednesday. I would love to take you out for a cup of coffee and just get to know you better and chat with you. Right. And they may say, oh, well, what are we going to talk about? And you can simply say, like, I'm actually, a really high producing agent here in the area, and insert whatever you want to say. Right. And they may say yes. And at that point, they may say no. But the reality is that if you've gotten someone to respond 5 to 7 times, you've earned the at bat of going for the ask. And if you don't take it, that's sort of your fault, right?
Sure. Yeah, you have to, swing the bat, right? And see what happens. It's at a certain point. Let me ask you this though, Michelle. That's a very like Instagram, you're having conversations. Is there more to this tactic outside of Instagram? Like let's pretend you did the Girl Scout cookie thing to me. You're the agent, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we're having this awesome conversation. And you're like, hey, do you want to go do this? I'm like, maybe, maybe not. Are you, Michelle, at that point also like friending me on Facebook or putting me in a customer journey with email drips and connecting
Yep.
on LinkedIn, like, or does it
Yeah.
just stop and only live inside of this Instagram?
I may connect with you on Facebook and I may connect with you on LinkedIn, but I'm certainly not adding you to an email drip yet. And the reason is like that's just bad marketing in my opinion. Like that just feels kind of yucky, I would say, to the person on the other side. They're like, all of a sudden I was having a good conversation with this person about our kids and now I'm in their email drip. Like,
Right.
how did that happen? Right. So I mean, I have been on many of email lists or text lists where I'm like, how the heck did I end up on this list? And it's not a good feeling
Yeah.
on the receiving end. So going and friending them on Facebook, going and friending them or on other platforms, LinkedIn, YouTube, whatever you want to do. YouTube's a bad example because most likely they don't have their own channel unless it's a business. But here's the other thing I will tell you as far as like my 24-48 hour rule. So because I talk about this a lot. So if I start interacting with someone and um like the question is, am I going to just go follow them right away? Right? Like if they're on my list of people, I find them in this category that I'm focused on, am I just going to go start following them immediately? And the
Mhm.
answer is absolutely not, right? Like do not do that because that comes out as desperation or like I'm trying to sell you something very quickly. So
Right.
if you've ever like heard someone say go follow, or I got on Instagram and I just followed a bunch of people hoping that they would all follow me back and that's how I grew my following from 500 to 1,000. Like you're doing it so wrong because
Mhm.
all those people will unfollow you eventually because they're going to be like, what the heck? So the way that I teach it is the 24-48 hour rule. So initiate contact with someone and start a conversation, have a good back and forth. Let them follow you first. Once that person follows me back, or sorry, once that person follows me, I now
Mhm.
wait 24 to 48 hours. And in that 24-48 hours, I'm continuing the conversation. I'm letting it continue and letting it continue to warm up. And then I start following them 24 to 48 hours later, right? So once they start following me 24-48 hours, now I'm following them back. Two reasons. One, it triggers a new notification to them, right? So they're going to see, oh, all of a sudden, like I've been talking to Michelle for a while and now she just started following me. That's cool.
Mhm.
And then secondly, I now am showing that I am genuinely like in this relationship, not just because I wanted you to follow me, but because I've been talking to you for the last 4 or 5 days. You're following me, and now I'm following you back. So now we've sort of built the bond. And I always use Avatar as the example. Are you familiar with the movie?
Yeah, of course.
Most people are. But Avatar 1 and 2, both kind of the same concept, but the Avatarians, right, or the people have bonds with these animals, right? Whether they're the horses or the dragon water rider ones in number two.
Mhm.
I sound like such a mom right now watching Disney movies, but that's okay. So but they have these bonds with these animals, and they typically have that thing at the end of their long tail or their hair, right, where they turn it around and they connect to their animal. Well, imagine like, and even in the movie, you've seen where some of those bonds don't happen, right? And why is that? Because typically the relationship hasn't been formed, so there isn't a bond. But
Mhm.
then if you don't do that, right, you don't have this strong relationship, and you burned the bridge, quote unquote, right? So we want to build the bond before we try to go jump on this flying dragon thing to make it choose us. And that's the concept of the 24-48 hour rule, is waiting and letting the relationship continue and nurture, and then try to close the loop by you're now following them, they're following you, now you guys are bonded.
So is your recommendation or best practice then to never follow someone until they follow you first?
I wouldn't say never. That's a too all inclusive of a word, but I would certainly say to be more on the cautious side first versus follow. Now, you and
Right.
I are we connected on Instagram yet? I don't know, but I'm going to make sure we are afterwards, and I'm going to go follow you. But again, I have the relationship with you now to be able to do that. Whereas, like, let's say on Facebook, when I sent you the first message, I'm not going to come and swing in and be like, hey, I'm going to go friend request you. I'm going to build a relationship with you first. And, that's a good question I feel like to ask now, because I literally did this to you.
Yeah.
So, how did that feel for you on the receiving end of what I teach?
Yeah. I mean, not like rushed or forced or anything. Like natural, I guess. So
That's,
I was a product of like the Beyond the Method
yep,
that you're teaching, which yeah, I didn't even
100%.
honestly, like I didn't even notice. It wasn't like, oh, this person did this and now they're doing all this stuff. It was kind of like progressing at a normal pace. So yeah, it worked. That was like, you just got me.
Yeah.
Like,
I
yeah, I
mean, you
felt,
are a product of Beyond the Method in action. And that's, whether it's getting on a podcast, whether it's earning the right to speak somewhere, whether it's, getting a webinar or doing something with someone, like all of it is about, are we being genuine in our approach? And the genuineness or the authenticity is very apparent and should be. And you're a byproduct of my Mondays, right? Of my leverage, right? Of our relationship with other individuals that led me to build the relationship with you. And your point was natural, right? That's exactly how I want it to feel. That's exactly how the person on the receiving end should feel. But most importantly, I think Beyond the Method, which maybe it happened on accident, I don't know, but I've heard more and more and more over the last several years that I feel I have given people hope, quite literally, and I'm like, okay, well, what does that mean? And it's a great thing to read and to see when someone sends you a message like that, but really what I believe Beyond the Method does is it gives people an opportunity to come at this in a way that really forges relationships in a time where I feel like the human civilization is just desperate for that. Like, we really want to feel like someone actually gives a crap about us, and then being able to build a relationship with someone where you and I get off this call and I know that 2 months from now, if I'm like, oh crap, I need something, I know that I can pick up the phone and call you, and you in theory should have that same feeling about the person on the other side. And
right.
I'm very passionate about what I do, and sometimes it keeps me up at night. And I think ultimately my number one goal has always been, can I teach someone how to do what they already do every day anyway to
Yeah.
get business, but do it in a way that comes across better and actually helps the reputation of the industry? Because I think that's also something that's on the line right now, right? Like, especially given everything that's going on with NAR and all kinds of other things that are happening, right? Like, relationships is how we build business, and if you are coming at it from the wrong angle, it will be very obvious.
Yeah. I mean, I bought into your approach. I think it's a very well thought out, methodical way to do it. So the approach and kind of your tactics are really smart, and I think that's a testament to like you did this trial and error, and now you're kind of making it even better for people to get more business at the end of the day, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have a kind of like, we just talked about the what, but there's a bigger the what in my opinion. Like, I know earlier on in the discussion we talked about like cold calling 10,000 people on a list, but then your method is like, well, it's not going to be 1,000 person 10,000 person list that we're dialing. It's going to be a shorter, more strategic list.
Mm-hmm.
But talk to me about like the mechanics of this, because an inbox in Instagram and Facebook, wherever you're doing this, can get like very large, and you can be in
Mm-hmm.
all these conversations and keeping track of like, Michelle followed me today at 2, 24 hours from now or 48 hours. Like, how are you recommending one keeps track of all this? Can we talk about
Yes.
that?
Yes. The tracker is basically the Bible of your Instagram prospecting. And quite literally, it really becomes the holy grail. And the tracker is very robust. It's a big giant Google sheet that we've built out. If you can imagine the sexiest Excel spreadsheet you've seen, that's pretty much what it is. And the focus of it is not being so married to like, oh my gosh, it's been 36 hours, I'm past my 24 hour. Like, it's more about, are you just making sure that you have the touch points with the people that need to be? So Fridays is what I call your re-engage day. So anybody that you've had a conversation with Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, that you feel like the conversation's gone back and forth, it's gone well, you feel like that might be a warm, hey, I want to make sure I continue this conversation. You literally, or figuratively, right? Like, pick up that person's name out of whatever the day is, Monday through Thursday, and you move it to the re-engage list on the Excel sheet. And then every Friday, your job is to go back and reignite that conversation with that person. So that's the tracker side. Now, in Instagram, there's not a really great way of tracking it that we've seen, aside from we've built a key, or kind of like, I mean, a key is the best word, but basically like a little grid of if it says flagged, which you can literally turn someone to an orange flag, you can label somebody as shipped, ordered. You can, there's all these different labels that you can put attached to someone's story, or I'm sorry, attached to someone's DM
Right.
message. And then that's how we track it. So like if I know you're someone that I need to be following up with consistently, I might flag you as or turn you orange with a little orange flag there, so I know that I need to continue this conversation as a priority. Now the other thing we have is favorites list. So favorites list becomes the hub for your hottest conversations. So you
Mm.
can have, I believe, 50 names. It's changed over time. It's gone from 50 to 100, back down to 50. It's changing all the time. But long story short, is your favorites list is where, let's say you and I are having a really good conversation. We've talked about meeting up, but maybe we haven't set a time. Oh, you just
I
gave
don't
me
know where that came from.
me either.
Sorry.
That's okay. But maybe you and I have had a really good back and forth. We've talked about meeting up, but we haven't officially actually taken that step. I am going to add you to my favorites list to make sure that I am constantly does Andrew have a new story? Is there a new piece of content, so that I'm staying really top of mind? Now, every time you post a new piece of content, I'm not going and saying, hey, by the way, Andrew, we were supposed to have a
Yeah.
conversation around a meeting, right? We're just talking about whatever it is that you posted, and I'm just kind of showing up. And that allows us to stay top of mind without being sort of pushy, right?
Yeah.
But the favorites list is the hub. And the beautiful thing about the favorites list is that Instagram will know that if this person is in your list, Instagram is going to push their content to you more frequently, so that it kind of organically already shows up on your feed more, so that you don't forget to engage with it.
Cool.
So,
So that favorite
yeah,
list is, just to be clear, is in Instagram, and
yeah,
you could do 50 or 100 or whatever it is
whatever
today.
the number is. Yeah.
And then what are you advising people? Like, I have 50 people on my favorites list, and they're all people I'm having pretty decent conversations with. Are you advising them to like all their stories, comment like sporadically, hardcore, like
Every Friday. So that's your re-engage day. So
just one
Fridays,
time
that's why re-engage day is that way.
though? Okay.
Now, again, like this is for structure, right? To give you guys a format to be able to execute this really confidently. If you respond to someone's story on Tuesday and you're not supposed to do it till Friday, like nobody's dying, it's
Right.
okay,
Yeah.
right? But the reality is that we just want to be cognizant of not being an over consumer, or trying to overconnect, especially when we're trying to forge a natural relationship. So I love that you said natural, because that's a word that I like in this conversation. Is
Right.
don't be married to the regime, if you will, or the structure as much as you are to the intuition that you have. Intuition reigns supreme always. The structure at least gives us focus. And I always use the example. I mean, I swam for 22 years. I swam the mile. That was my signature event, which, if you're not familiar with swimming, it's a really long race. It's 66 laps in a short course pool, and it's 30 laps in an Olympic pool, the Olympic size that you see on during the Olympics on TV. So I got really, really friendly with the black line on the bottom of a pool, because what ultimately happens is that becomes your guide, or kind of your true north, to go from one end of the pool to the other end of the pool. But at some point, right, I have to make the race my own, and I have to use my intuition of, do I surge forward, do I slow down and reserve energy, do I take in my surroundings and pay attention, because maybe I have 10 laps left, but maybe I'm really close to winning this race,
Mhm.
or being in the front of this race, and maybe I'm going to push a little harder a little sooner than I maybe should, or would have normally, according to my quote plan, right? And I think that story, it resonates so well with what I'm trying to get you guys to teach, or to do, excuse me, which is use your intuition, have a guide, have a true north of, do this, do that on these days, but allow for the kind of fluidity of, this conversation is just so good. Maybe I'm going to go for it a little sooner than the
Yeah.
5 to 7 touch
Yeah.
points, you know?
Yeah, there's no
Um,
like hard and fast rules that you're not allowed to do something sooner or later, but
yeah,
you're giving them that guide to
yeah,
consist. If you follow this consistently, you're going to have a good shot of converting these people from
yeah.
basically strangers that you reached out to, but you're approaching it from a very smart way to ultimately build that foundation relationship and turn it into something.
I will tell you, because people listening to this might say, well, is this really scalable? Like, I don't know that I have time to do this, or, every day is like, oh, well, I have to send a whole bunch of messages. Like, I don't have time for that. Well, yeah, you do. Or, and the way I will explain it to everybody is it's one relationship a day. Like my relationship with you, Andrew, that day. And I love that I can use this example because it's so true. You were my one relationship that day. So every morning I wake up and I focus on finding one new relationship each of the 5 days of the week. Right. And each of those 5 relationships is different categories for me. I got an email while we were recording this podcast of an introduction that someone made to a big event, that big event might need a speaker like me. And in doing that, I had earned the right to have the conversation with the lady who made the introduction. She was the relationship that I made on a different day, right? So one of my focuses is events, podcasts, etc., whatever the day is, and I focus on that one relationship. So me sending you that voice note that day took me all of 30 seconds. So
Yeah.
I knew, well, however long my voice note was, maybe a minute, right? But I had to find the relationship. So call it 7 minutes to find the relationship, then the message that I sent to you. So it took me call it 10 minutes to do my job for that day that created the opportunity to be able to hang out with you today. And so one relationship could mean one message. One relationship could mean it takes you 20 messages to get to the one. And I think, but I'm very grateful that I'm at the point in my career where maybe it does only take me 1 or 2 messages to get the at bat, and that's a really fun place to be, but it hasn't always been that way.
Yeah, and I'm sure, I mean, your consistency that you put in X number of years ago led to that point. But if you started this today, like for anyone listening, you got to build up to it. You're not just going to get that overnight. That leads me to like one of my last questions I have for you, and I know you got a busy day ahead or busy evening ahead of you. But how long are you telling people like do Beyond the Method? Like you have a calendar block Monday through Friday. It sounds like I don't know if you do or advise on the weekends or whatnot, but on average, like what are your customers? How much time are your customers putting into this process every day?
Yeah, daily, I always say like time blocking an hour for the active outbound prospecting every day. The ultimate goal is 45 comments and 20 story replies every day. That's kind of like the golden rule that I've come up with. And where the numbers came from is neither here nor there. It's just a number that was my true north back in the day, and it's continued. But 45 comments and 20 story replies, I personally can do in about 30-35 minutes. I created it, so it should be faster for me, but for most people, it's an hour to 90 minutes. So I will tell you the same thing for everybody listening, and as well as for everybody listening, that 90 minutes to dedicate towards it is a lot, right? When you're also busy trying to do a million other things. So I say set a timer on your phone for 60 minutes. Whatever you get done in 60 minutes is what you get done. So if it's 20 and 10, it's 20 and 10, but those 20 and 10 are a hell of a lot better than doing 0.
Yeah.
And the concept really comes down to another mutual friend of ours, Grant Wise, who has also been my coach for 3.5 years. He's an incredible human and an amazing friend, but and an incredible coach. But he has told me for years and years, tiny hinges swing big doors, right? Do good things consistently over a long period of time. And a year from now, you'll wake up and be like, whoa.
Right.
And
Right.
I think that I am truly living, breathing proof of that. And a good example would be like whether you're in therapy or not, right? Like I'm a huge believer in personal development, and I've been with either with a therapist or in therapy for years, and I'm a huge proponent of it. And there are some days where you're like, did that actually help? Did I do anything? Did I accomplish anything today? And then all of a sudden you wake up and you're like 6 months later, your marriage is different. You're a better mom. Like you're all of these things. And you're like, or you're a better friend. You're like, what happened to me?
Right.
And you don't realize it in the moment that what you're doing in that 60 minutes with the therapist is going to turn into you being all of these things. But it has that effect if you are consistent and you show up. And I think the other option, or the other thing I will say to all of you guys listening, and to you as well, Andrew, is this isn't like a, if I get to it, I'll get to it type of thing, right? Because you wouldn't do that in your prospecting in your business right now, would you? You're like, oh, I don't feel like calling anybody today. Not going to, right?
Right.
So it has to be one of those things where it becomes a non-negotiable. And my ultimate goal for everybody is to be able to never have to cold call again, because if you do this well, you shouldn't have to.
Right. Yeah. Dedication to whatever lead gen you're doing, but specifically here, and consistency. That's going to ultimately, you're not going to see, like, you go to the gym for 2 weeks, you're not going to see anything. You go to the gym for a year, you're going to see a lot of things, right?
Yep.
Same
Yep.
concept here. Consistency with whatever you're doing is key, right? You're
Hmm.
key.
And finding
Um,
tiny wins,
right.
find the tiny wins. And I have a brag book, quote unquote, is what Grant makes me call it. And it's just like the little individual wins that happen on the days that when you're having a hard day, or you're having a day where nobody answers, or you have a day where you're like, crap, none of that went the way that I wanted it to go.
Yeah.
You open your brag book and it's sort of right there, and you're like, okay, this is why I'm doing it, because this win was why I started all of this in the first place. And it really, really helps. And I think for us as high achievers in general, we need that.
Yeah, I agree 100% wholeheartedly with that statement. But Michelle, this has been really awesome. Learned a great deal of stuff that I want to go and implement as well. But if anyone listening on here still kind of needs this push and wants to get in touch with you, which I'll also include in the notes here, how does one reach out to Michelle, and how does one uh, learn a little bit more about Beyond the Method?
Yeah, easiest way is just to DM me on Instagram, Berman Media Social. I'll make sure you have the link to that, but you can also just type in Michelle Berman-Mikel on Instagram and it'll pop right up. But Berman Media Social is my actual Instagram handle. I answer all my own DMs. It is me sending that message back. And I think the easiest way to start learning about Beyond the Method, if it's something that you're intrigued by, is to do a 1 hour private coaching session. I think it's an easy barrier of entry for people, and it's designed to allow us to really kind of create a plan for you. And then at the end of that hour, you decide if Beyond the Method is something you want or not. And it makes it so that people have a really good understanding of just what even is this as a
Right.
whole. Because I do believe that there are, sadly, fortunately or unfortunately, whatever, a lot of people out there trying to teach you how to do Instagram, and a lot of people out there trying to get you to focus on things that, in my opinion, don't really matter. And so for me, it's having a unique voice in a really crowded industry is something that I've really strived for,
Yep.
especially as of late.
Well, very cool. Thank you so much for your time, sharing your story. Again, we'll post where you can reach out to her on Instagram below. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time and for having me. It's been really
Yep.
fun.
All right. Take care.